can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of love, and I need
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and without further ado, I got to introduce one of the geopolitical heavyweights and one of my favorite people to talk to and listen to about all of the geopolitical events that's coming out or that are underway is KJ Noh. How is it going today, my friend?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good, KJ. I want to jump right into this. I know your time is valuable. And what is going on with the empire in the Western Hemisphere? Do you believe that America is now at that point where you and I talked about when the empire starts realizing that it is on fumes and that it's now starting to try to lash out at everybody?
Yes, I think this is correct. Now, I think it's important to, for example, look at what the deep state is saying to itself. For example, if you look at an organization like Chatham House, this is really the heart of the heart of the heart of the deep state. Their director's annual lecture says, "We have had from President Trump what amounts to a revolution. He has dismissed international law and the interests of old rallies. It is not grandiose to call this the end of the Western alliance. And we have to defend ourselves against the US itself in trade and perhaps security." So you can see that there's a cannibalization inside the Western hegemonic bloc. It's like the mafia wife, who has lived high on the hog for decades. And now they're realizing that the brutality that the mafia boss exercises against others can also be exercised against them as well. I think that this is what we're happening. So hence we see, the threats against Greenland, Denmark, threats against Canada. You see Carney's about face regarding the United States. And again, saying that, the system has been disrupted. We are no longer in Kansas anymore. I think there are tectonic shifts that are happening. And at the same time, we have to understand that this does not make things easier or simpler. People think that the U.S. has now decided to accommodate itself with the multipolar world. That's much, much too optimistic. It's a complex chessboard, and you can look at certain areas where it looks like multipolarity is winning, where the European Western alliance is under fracture, and even US vassals and allies are rooting around for a fix, even China, and supporting multipolarity. But if you look at the other section of the chessboard, you can see that China is being hemmed in. There are pieces that are moving into place very aggressively. The threats are stacking on top of each other. All of the proxies are being weaponized, and the military momentum looks pretty much unbroken. Let me give you some examples. Japan has remilitarized, and it has de facto declared publicly that it will wage war against China under the pretext that, Taiwan is some kind of security threat to it. It's not. Japan is placing offensive missiles on Okinawa to attack China. This is very, very close to Taiwan Island, less than 100 miles away. The Philippines has permanently placed missiles, the Typhoon missile launcher system, to attack China. Taiwan province will be receiving $11 billion worth of advanced weaponry. The US is currently planning to take control over the Japanese military, or more specifically, they claim they're going to get joint OPCON, operational control, over Japanese forces. Joint control means the US controls. Japan and the Philippines have signed yet another military agreement. And then the CFC commander, USFK CFC commander in South Korea, has rejected the return of operational control of Korean troops to South Korea. They have said that ROK Ground Forces Command will become a standing joint command, a permanent joint command, meaning US is going to permanently control South Korean ground forces. They've rejected any de-escalation in joint exercises. And of course, we know that Trump is preparing a nuclear tetrad by inventing or creating a new class of nuclear capable cruise missile carriers. Japan and Korea are being encouraged to nuclearize. Every country around China's border is being destabilized or turned against it. Every country allying with China is being threatened, sanctioned, couped, destabilized, undermined, attacked, or kidnapped. The entire Asia Pacific is being weaponized and staged for war. And of course, there's this endless performance and subterfuge and perfidy that we're constantly being subjected to. So this isn't to say that there aren't counter moves, North Korea and China, China and Iran, Venezuela, but I don't think the empire is going gently into the good night. And I would say to the extent that there is something resembling, quote unquote, a Donroe doctrine, I see it simply as shoring up your flanks before you start your major offensive. Or if you prefer, it's like you're creating your pawn structure on the chessboard because your initial queen attack didn't work. So you settle down, create your pawn structure, and then you're, regrouping for a much, much more coordinated attack. The US empire is a global empire, and I don't think it's credible to think that the predator is simply going to slink home and become vegetarian. The hawks around won't settle for that. They need and they want US hegemony by any means. They don't tolerate a world of equals. And they also know that the clock is ticking down on them. They're running out of time. Sooner rather than earlier is on their agenda.
And KJ, you hit these points right on. Right on the head. I've been telling people because they think that America is just trying to recede and come back to the Western Hemisphere. And I've been saying to the people, no, what she's doing is she's shoring up her flanks because, and at the same time, these moves that she's making are strategic. It is also to keep Russia preoccupied with Cuba, to weaken Russia, Iran, and China, and Bolivia, and in Venezuela, in that area, and then to attack the weaker elements of the alliance, like Iran and other areas. That's why the build up to the Middle East, to the war in the Middle East is taking place. But a lot of people continue to believe that because America is in trouble, she's going to retrench herself back into the Western Hemisphere. And as I always say, there are 3 R's in empire: rest, rearm, and recalibrate. And this is what the United States is doing right now. She's talking about a blockade of Cuba. She's going in. She just put pressure on Bolivia to cut ties with China and to cut ties with Iran. She just kidnapped the president of Venezuela. She's threatening Mexico. She has threatened Colombia. And all of this is, most people, they compartmentalize and they see that out of context. They don't see it in the greater scheme of things to weaken Russia and China, but with China as the big prize. This is why they preoccupied Russia with Ukraine, and this is why they're going after Iran, because they want to weaken any land routes. They want to break up, have straight dominion over the water routes in the Straits of Malacca and all of this, so that they can control or choke out China in the eventuality of war. And before I get your comment on this, I also want to tell people, I was just reading a public policy paper where they were talking about that China now has the second largest nuclear submarine force in the world. China has surpassed the United States in a lot of different technological domains. The Chinese now are threatening to surpass the United States Air Force. They have the largest Navy in a modern and the largest army in the world. All of this seems to me that it's a play on China, whether it's Venezuela or whether it's Iran. It looks like it's a play on Russia and China to prevent legitimate alternative poles of power. What do you say about that,
I
KJ?
think, I think you're absolutely right. I think that ultimately the final target is China, and as I've said before, China is the main dish. It's just a matter of how they are sequencing or how they are sequencing their courses to get to that main dish. Uh, I think we would be misguided if we thought what is going on currently as retrenchment. I see it as resequencing. There's clearly division of labor. This is actually the term the US itself uses. And the US is a global empire. You don't see any bases being closed. You don't, the US military is routinely does exercises or does actions in 170 countries. You don't see any scaling back of that. In fact, the US has decided to increase its military budget to $1.5 trillion. I mean, that dwarfs the entire budget of the rest of the world. It's 60% larger than every other country on the planet put together. And so we see here that the global empire is not retreating, but it is resequencing. And of course, part of that resequencing and consolidating its flanks has to do with going after all of China's allies, as you pointed out, Venezuela, Iran. These are resource-rich states that provide important resources or exchange important resources. And of course, as for China's development, both economically and as a military power, it's true that its military has become more powerful, but it is almost entirely a defensive military. It's designed for the defense of its region, and makes sense because it's surrounded by bases. It has also done this while reducing its military force by at least 500,000 in the past few decades. It has been reducing the size of its military force, and it also spends one fourth. It spends 4 times on its education budget than what it spends on its military. The United States is the opposite. The U.S. Federal government spends 4 times as much on the military as it does on education. In China, it's the other way around. And that's what you see the differences. In China, they're using their national wealth to create a livable society and to develop their country and to develop their people. This is a system that develops people, whereas the United States is a system that looks for ways to exploit people. How can we best exploit people, and how can we best dumb them down and make them fungible so that they can simply be, cogs in a vast machine of profit taking. So I think these are important things to understand. The other thing to understand of China's military, in particular its nuclear force, is that it has no first use. They have explicitly declared that they will not use nuclear forces in a preemptive manner, whereas the U.S. explicitly does have a preemptive strike policy. Essentially, they believe that they can win by using a nuclear sucker punch. And you see this constant escalation and this constant rehearsal of the use of nuclear force. First, in the strategy documents, in the high-level elite discourse, you see everybody saying that, we need to go nuclear. And, Foreign Affairs recently wrote an article, and they just kind of tossed it out. And they said, we need to use tactical nukes so that we can thin out Chinese troops. Thin out Chinese troops. It's just kind of a throwaway line, And if you go to Rand Corporation, you can see they're recruiting interns to war game the use of tactical and strategic nukes. So they're just using, I mean, these are just games for interns now. It's not even top secret, a discourse. It's pretty clear that the U.S. plans on waging nuclear war because it knows that it cannot win a conventional war. And it also knows that China doesn't have first strike policy, and it also doesn't keep its nuclear weapons, warheads, on hair trigger alert. They're actually separated from the delivery vehicles, and so they would have to be assembled in order to respond. And so they're thinking that they can get ahead with a nuclear sucker punch, a nuclear first strike. I think that is very much part of the calculus. And I also have to mention that on February 5th, the START treaty ends. So any restraints on nuclear development, on nuclear weapons, goes out the window unless the treaty is renewed. And I seriously doubt that it's going to be renewed. So I think that we're in a dangerous place. Those of us who care about the future of the planet or anything, I think this is the time when we have to be even more vigilant rather than to think that, everything's good now. The U.S. is in a retrenchment mode, and we don't have to worry anymore. If you read people like Wallerstein, he points out that capitalist empires move through 5 stages. Initially, there's commerce, which is kind of a pre-capitalist stage, if you will, and then they shift to slavery, and then they go into industrial production, and then they shift to finance, and then finance hits its terminal contradictions, and then the defibrillator that they always use is war. We've seen this cycle over and over again, and we see this happening again. As the contradictions become terminal, the propensity to war increases.
I was listening to Victor Goy, and he was speaking to academics from around the world, and he was talking about China's no first use nuclear policy. And he says that, China wanted to send a strong message to the United States and everybody else that China wants to be everybody's friend. But if you take a look at what they presented on Victory Day or their anniversary, the military anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, he said they sent the message out through this missile called 61. And he says that this missile 61 can hit any place on Earth in less than 20 minutes. It cannot be intercepted. It's hypersonic, and it has 60 nuclear bombs and 1 hydrogen bomb there. And he says he wanted the world to know that China will never use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state, or will never ever use nuclear weapons against a nuclear state. But if the United States wants to fire a decapitating first strike, China will not be the one to fire the first strike, but it will not allow America to fire a second strike. And so why aren't the policymakers in DC picking up on what China is trying to convey to them? Are they still inebriated off of being drunk on what American exceptionalism used to be, and the power and the influence that they used to have?
I hate to repeat myself, but I've compared this to the drunk, right? The drunk, and the bar is closing, and they should go home quietly. They've struck out with everybody. Their credit card is now being rejected. They're not getting any more drinks, but they don't want to go home, and they're going to go out with a big fight. And that inebriation is really the inebriation of power. They're addicted to power. They don't want to let go of power. I mean, let's think about it. Jason Hickel has pointed out that the global North has appropriated, in just the past 25 years, $250 trillion worth of wealth through unequal exchange. That's $10 trillion a year. That's a pretty big tribute that they have been getting in this unfair manner. They don't want to let go of that. The tech bros, they know that they rely on this system of coercion and hegemony in order for them to gain these kind of super profits that they're so accustomed to. And so they don't want to give up their power. And so that's why I think that even though there is incredible risk with war, and certainly unthinkable risk with nuclear war, they don't care. That is to say, as I've said before, they would rather see the end of the world than the end of their power and privilege. And the cynical part of me says they don't care about dying because A, they think they're going to survive in their bunkers, or they're millenarian Christians who want the rapture to happen anyway. That's a conflict of interest, I believe. Or, and this is, the most cynical, is that they're already dead. They're really inside, they're deeply, deeply, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually dead. And they're nihilists. They don't care. And if you look at Peter Thiel, who looks like death warmed over, the warmed over corpse of Roy Cohn, I think that starts to make sense. Or, Zuckerberg. I mean, is that a living, breathing human entity? I'm not sure about that.
KJ, we have a question from the chat, and Dave H5947 asked the question. KJ, 3 weeks before Japan surrendered in Taipei, 25th October 1945, Locke delivered a letter to Chiang Kai-shek from President Truman, dated the 3rd October 1945. Do you know what was in it?
I don't know the specifics, but I invite Dave H51 to share that information. I know the general outlines of what the post-war agreements were and what the U.S. was planning.
Okay. We have another question from the chat, and this was actually the first question from my guy Grizzly Martin number one. He says, KJ, will Chumo attack Iran before the supposed meeting with President Xi in April? And if so, how in the world could Xi allow or honor this meeting?
I don't have a crystal ball. I do know that I surmise that an attack on Iran is brewing. I believe that they see it as unfinished business from 1979, really, or 1953, however you want to count it. But I do think that an attack on Iran is brewing. And I think that Iran is preparing, and I think it's preparing carefully with the help of China and Russia. And it will not be a cakewalk. It will not be, the neocons always think that it's going to be a cakewalk, but it didn't work. We see recently that the color revolution was disrupted at tremendous cost. Thousands of people died, but this was clearly the precursor, the kind of hybrid war that was going to create the justification for kinetic intervention that was rapidly tamped down. So clearly the hybrid war isn't working as well. And the US likes to have both pots simmering at the same time. They want the hybrid war, and then they also want the hybrid war weakens a state, delegitimates it, and then that creates tremendous justification and force in order to take down the state. And that piece has been tamped down. And of course, in the previous attack, the 12-day war, Iran showed that it could stand and fight back, that it was capable of taking anything that was thrown at it and slugging it out and forcing the other side, in this case Israel, to back down. So it's not going to be a cakewalk. But I think that, as I said, once again, we're assuming that the neocon ruling hegemonic agenda is rational. It's not. It's about domination. It sees things only in terms of domination, and it believes that anything less than complete and total domination results in existential insecurity, and that it cannot tolerate.
Um, I, you and I, we both come to the same conclusion about all of the things that America has her hands tied into.
Mhm.
Um, and you and I both come to this conclusion that the time is against America. See, this is, as I tell everybody, this is not 30 or 40 years ago. We have, when there was a military and technological and economic gap between America and her rivals or whatever. This is no longer the case. So, with people getting out of U.S. treasuries with the U.S. Debt equal to or greater than her economy itself, with multiple nations forming blocks outside of American power, whether they be military, political, industrial, or economic blocks, and with the dollar already losing 97% of its purchasing power parity. How can those in Washington, D.C., Brussels, London, Paris, Berlin believe that the American empire, and by extension, the Western world, can maintain these color revolutions, these interference in sovereign affairs without a drastic or complete collapse of their financial and political system here?
Well, there's a thing that empires are very good at, which is one is propaganda and also self-propaganda. They tend to get high on their own supply. I mean, the empire became powerful not only because it had military and economic power, but because it was the consummate creator of indoctrination and propaganda. And along the way, the empire became high on its own supply. It believes its own lies, and it believes that it is the 1,000-year eternal empire. So they feel like there is no end to it. There's people who still believe, that we're living in the 90s, that this is the end of history. There's an interesting discussion. I recently saw some strange quote unquote scholar, and he was saying that Fukuyama was wrong about the end of history. This is the guy who wrote the book, who said that, the capitalist liberal international order was the end of history. And he said, well, it's not the end of history because, there are other countries that are rising and they're all capitalist and they are, challenging the US hegemony. But actually, that is what Fukuyama was saying, was that, liberal capitalism was the end state. So he's confused. So a lot of people are very, very confused. They can't quite understand what is going on. But the empire is collapsing, and it's collapsing because of its own internal contradictions. As we've said before, capitalist countries, they moved from industrial capitalism to financialized capitalism. Why do they do that? Because what happens under industrialized capitalism, anybody who's played Monopoly, more than once, understands that eventually you get monopolies. Industrial corporations, they become monopolies. And so Amazon controls, the online sales, there are some monopoly actors in, social media, et cetera, et cetera. And as you do this, as you create monopolies, you do several things. One is you inshitify, because you don't need to provide goods, services, or goods because you have control, you have the monopoly. And the second thing you do is you financialize, because your quote unquote customers are no longer capable. They've been so immiserated by both monopoly control of markets, including the labor market, that their wages are driven below the reproduction rate. Therefore, they no longer have the capacity to buy the things that the corporation is selling. And so because of that, the monopoly corporation will financialize. The quick example, if you order a burrito on DoorDash, DoorDash will ask you if you want to pay for it in 4 easy installments. Okay, that tells you two things. One is that people are so immiserated that they actually have to borrow money to eat lunch. That's one piece of it. And the second piece of it is that this is where they want to get the easy profits, the easy capitals. They're no longer easy profits in industrial manufacturing and market competition. As Peter Thiel says, competition is for losers. They want monopolies, and under monopoly conditions, what you want is rent extraction. You simply take a claim on somebody's earnings or their future earnings. You simply gouge them because you can, and also because there's no other way to get money out of them. They can't afford to buy things anymore. And so once you hit this monopoly stage of capitalism, everything financializes. The US is a financialized economy, doesn't really build things. It can't build things. And as it does this, it also has an equal propensity towards violence, because the contradictions of the financial system, of a financialized capitalism, are clear and obvious. You cannot extract forever from people. You cannot get blood from a stone. We saw this in the 2008-2009 financial crash, when the entire capitalist system collapsed around its ears, and it was only, held up through, massive by massive extraction from, again, the working classes. And so the empire is heading towards collapse. It has deindustrialized. As it has deindustrialized, it has also de-skilled, which is to say, it has made everybody stupid. Needs to make people stupid so that they can be kept ignorant and exploited. That's what the system is about. And so, for example, we no longer have the capacity, for example, in California, to fix the power grid, because there are no longer enough people going into, for example, work as linemen, because that nobody wants to do that work anymore. It's hard, it's risky, etc. But also there's simply not enough people, and there's not enough training, and there's a kind of constant de-skilling and dumbing down of the population. And then to manage that, to kind of palliate that, we have the bread and circuses. You throw your sports and porn and dope and drugs and whatever have you. And all of this serves the purpose of diffusing any capacity to change the system in a rational fashion. And of course, the final stage of this is this reversion to fascism, where you scapegoat the other, you appeal to nationalism, because this will misdirect people's anger towards an unknown, to an innocent other. And hence you have these immigration raids, these, massive turn towards racist and supremacist and nationalist, viewpoints. And all of this is trying to paper over the collapse that is coming inside the system. And it's happened several times before to capitalist empires. It's coming for this one. And the empire managers want to stave this off as long as possible. And they know that the defibrillator, the thing that they can pull if necessary, is global war.
Mm. And KJ, speaking on those matters, how long can this go on? Because again, we go back to the economic crisis that is going on in America. The debt burden is so out of whack that it is unreal. And then at the same time, as you said, the dumbing down of the masses. And what's crazy is they believe that it is a benefit for them to dumb down the masses, when in reality, that is laying, as I often say, thermite or a nuclear bomb at the base of the society that they're trying to maintain, or the empire that they're trying to maintain, because you're dumbing down future lawyers, doctors, scientists, educators, inventors, instructors, everything, so that you won't be able to compete on a global scale. So How long can they continue to do this, especially with the dollar dying? The economy is in a tailspin. Poverty is exploding. There's a great divide racially, economically, politically, everything. How long can this go on in the near future?
Well, I think that once again, I hate to make predictions, but I think it's as Keynes said. The system can be irrational longer than you can remain solvent. That is, it can go on for a very, very long time. Just coming back to this notion, uh, I think it's important for understand that de-skilling and dumbing down of the population is desired and necessary. Of course, you can point out that it is counterproductive, but the system doesn't care that a system that what they're doing is counterproductive. Under capitalism, you need to make jobs and employees fungible, that is to say, exchangeable and easily replaceable. The best example is the McDonaldization of a job, where you no longer need a skilled cook. You just have it broken down into components so that any person pulled off the street can do it. And the moment they walk off the job, you can replace them. But also, you want that de-skilling and dumbing down to ensure compliance, consent, and to prevent, and this is really important, to prevent any critical thinking that might challenge the system. That's why, for example, the universities are so expensive, because they want to make sure that if you are getting anything resembling a higher education with quote unquote critical thinking, they want to make sure that you are so saddled with debt that you won't even think of thinking in creative fashion, or in some way that might idealistically change the system. They want you saddled with debt, and they want you to start working immediately in some finance money producing system. But this is what Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations hundreds of years ago. He said that under capitalism, essentially what happens is mental mutilation. Mental mutilation, where a person, quote, would become as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human being to become. I mean, this was all predicted hundreds of years ago, and it goes counter, even under feudalism, people aspired to literacy. There was a thing called the clerical exemption. And if you could read the Bible or quote the Bible, you would be treated leniently in a court. You would be treated, quote unquote, as clergy, and therefore, be given a light sentence, as opposed to, feudal criminal law, where, anything was a hanging. So I think that we have to understand that the system has its own logic. Can it understand what it's doing and change its ways? I don't see it, and I certainly don't see it happening. I think that we're at the stage where the system is turning on itself, obviously, and it's this kind of terminal contradiction where Bertrand Russell, he talked about, the barber of Seville. Can the barber shave himself when he only shaves people who cannot shave themselves? This is Russell's paradox, right? If you can't, the barber can only shave people who cannot shave themselves. Well, the barber is a barber, so of course he can shave himself. But then that means that but he can only shave people who shave themselves, who cannot shave themselves, so he can. And so it's a paradox that flips back and forth. But what we're seeing is a similar thing, which is, can the colonial system colonize those who facilitate colonization, i.e. NATO or EU? And yes, it can. Can the system attack those who enable the system to attack others? Yes, it can, because it's in its cannibalistic phase. And so, as you go to war and as you become more beleaguered, you start shooting your own troops and your own horses and etc. You steal from your own troops. This is something that happens. And I think we're in that logic, we're in that part, in that dimension. And of course, people like Carney, who's at Chatham House, or the other Chatham House leaders and the ruling Atlanticist elite, they're shocked by this. They're really, really shocked. They don't believe that the system would cannibalize itself. But as I said, it's like the mafia. It's like the mafia wife. You have to understand the violence that the mafia boss engages in, that allows you to have the living standard and the comforts that you are accustomed to. That violence can very easily be turned against you. And so, hence, we see the panic in the European ruling elite. Well, I mean, the bully can turn on their own sidekick. Is it a done deal? We don't know yet. But certainly, if we look at the capitals of the Atlanticist, rulers, there's panic all the way through.
Mm. Alex Trainer and Gregory Manarino both told me that the system was set up to cannibalize everybody. It must consume. It is parasitic by nature. That it has to have a host body to continue to expand, to continue to exist. If this is the case, then how can America and the Western world continue on when the people that they used to fleece, that they used to suck the life's blood out, like the Sahel nations, Latin America, the Caribbean, Central Asia, Eurasia, are now pulling each one of the leeches off their skin and burning them off? How can the system continue if it no longer has a willing a body or a willing host for them to suck the life's blood out?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the issue that they're facing, right? The parasite sees when the host tries to prevent itself being parasited, having their blood sucked out of them, they see that as an existential threat because they're used to this parasitic lifestyle. As I said, just by one estimate alone, $10 trillion worth of unequal exchange, $10 trillion of wealth is extracted from the global south every single year. Just in the past 25 years, $250 trillion. That is an extraordinary wealth that they have gotten essentially for free. So inside that parasitic system where the US is the apex predator or apex parasite, and then you have the kind of sub imperial parasites below that, and then at the very bottom you have the peripheral states that are being sucked and bled dry. What happens at a certain point is either there is the attempt to liberate yourself from this extraction, which is partially happening through the rise of a multipolar world led by China through BRICS. And what that does is that accelerates the panic, accelerates the desire for even more extraction and financial extraction. And then what the empire also needs, it needs to constantly expand spatially. And so we saw these huge reversions to primitive accumulation, to taking over territory. For example, Indonesia was one of these. Indonesia was this vast neoliberal playpen. Haiti was another one. Myanmar was supposed to be. Myanmar is rich in resources. The Western capitalist system wanted to expand into Myanmar, but it's not happening right now because there's a massive civil war. And of course, the ultimate prize was China. They wanted to go into China, dismember it, and then suck it dry, as they had done, for example, or they had done partially with the Soviet Union. This logic of constantly expanding, of constantly spatially resolving its contradictions by taking over larger and larger swaths of countries and stealing, exploiting their resources, has started to hit a final limit, and it's also being challenged with a counter hegemonic bloc that is led by China, Russia, Iran, and the other BRICS countries. And so, under those circumstances, what's a parasite to do, right? What is it going to do? Is it going to become, vegetarian? Is the predator going to become a vegan? No, it's going to fight to keep its system intact. And so, this is the immediate violence and the immediate escalation that we're seeing. And as I said, the ultimate end game is war, and very possibly nuclear war. This is why it's such a dangerous, dangerous moment in history.
Two more things before I let you go, KJ. Number one is this: I continue to hear people talk about multipolarity, and they're talking about the United States will be one of the poles of power in this multipolar world, and to me, it cannot happen, because if we look at history, and history best rewards those who research it best, that when you have accumulated more debt, and the United States is the largest debtor nation, not just now, but in the history of the world, has alienated more people, is bombing multiple countries. She continues to act arrogant. Her dollar is being displaced. Her industry is non-existent. Her manufacturing power is no longer relevant in any way, shape, or form. How can she be a pole of power when she no longer have those advantages of money printing and shipping out inflation across the world, while she lives above her means, and having these extravagant military budgets, because people are buying her debt? When the debt buying stops and the emperor has no clothes, how can the empire maintain as a viable global power?
Well, it should become just a normal country. It become a normal country? I mean, the U.S. has the capacity to live within its means, but it doesn't have the capacity to have this constant hyper extraction, uh, hyper profit that it is used to living on. And let's be very clear: none of those hyper profits have gone to any to the vast majority of working class people here. It's all siphoned up to the top, with a tiny, tiny amount that trickles down to the to aspects of the professional managerial class or the labor aristocracy. But by and large, the U.S. should return to a multilateral world where countries are sovereign and that they don't interfere with each other, and they cooperate to mutual benefit. This would be the ideal state of affairs. And, this is what the BRICS and the multipolar world represents. It's a reversion or return or a reinstitution of, the principles of Bandung. That is to say, sovereign states that do not interfere with each other, that do not go to war with each other, that seek peace and mutual cooperation. This is what we want. But as you point out, can the empire go gently into that good night? That's the, $30 trillion question, or really the $136 trillion question, because that is what the US owes. That's the US debt, $137 trillion, if you do accrual accounting as opposed to cash accounting. And no sane corporation does cash accounting beyond a certain threshold. So the US is really up to its ears in debt, $137 trillion. That debt is financed through printing dollars. But the reason why the US gets to print dollars at will is because the dollar is backed up by oil. It's a petrodollar. It's pegged to the petrodollar. It's a little bit like this. You live in a city, and everybody's doing productive work, but there is a casino. A casino does not do productive work. Essentially, it issues poker chips or chips for gambling. Now, if you can get it so that everybody has to come to the casino to play in order to get those poker chips, then the casino can issue as many chips as it wants to. So this is the dollar system. The US is like a gambling house. As I said, it's a financialized economy. It's a gambling house. It's a casino, but they've set it up with the global or the local system so that everybody has to get chips from the casino in order to buy anything. You want to buy gasoline, you have to use a poker chip. And that way, there's an endless demand for poker chips, and the casino gets to issue as many chips as it wants to while doing nothing productive except gambling and staking a claim on your money. That's the way that the system has been set up. But unfortunately, the US is also undermining, as it is undermining everything else, it's undermining the dollar's status as a reserve currency by weaponizing it in every which way, which makes it no longer a safe asset, no longer a reliable asset, no longer a medium of exchange, no longer even a unit of account. And so we see the global reserve system fracturing into, at current, at least 50 different currencies, of which the global south, the major leaders of the global south, are taking larger and larger proportions. And so once the exorbitant privilege of the dollar as reserve currency collapses, and it's coming closer and closer, then the US does not have a way to sustain itself. It has, you know, as the character in Streetcar Named Desire says, has always lived off the kindness of strangers, right? Or more precisely, the exploitation of strangers. And it can't do that anymore. It's too fragile now. And so under those circumstances, what are its options? Will it pay up on its $137 trillion? Will it become a normal state? Will it, fall as an equal in a multilateral system of equal sovereign countries working together? Or will it try and preserve its status at the apex, as the apex predator, by using force? That's the thing that is the most dangerous. And that's the thing that we have to watch out for.
Now, before we bring the show to a close, I want to play a clip from you and I, one of our shows that we've done together, because we've done multiple shows together. And I want you to reflect on what you said in these shows and tell me, is this still your perspective on things that are taking place and that will take place? So here we are, right? Now, the last question of the night to you is this. If war breaks out, we know, but I have to pose this question to you, because America is so dependent on China's export to the United States, and 93 to 95% of all goods on U.S. shelves and all the stores come from China or a subsidiary of China. When war breaks out and China starts an embargo on the United States, what will the economic scene look like? Because all hell should break loose, because there will be massive bankruptcy, massive unemployment, massive store closures, scarce food, scarce items. Where would this take America at home when war breaks out in Asia between the two superpowers?
Let's just think about that a little bit. I gave you a small idea when I said that, there are 1,500, almost 1,600 companies that supply parts that the United States uses for air-to-air missiles or air-to-land missiles, right? So that gives you a sense. That's in a sector where they don't want that dependency. But if you think about everything else, you're absolutely right. The United States cannot live without China. There's a fundamental sense in which we are like conjoined twins, right? And if you separate the conjoined twins, you have to understand that it's the other twin, China, which has the beating heart and the liver and the brain, right? Right. So what's going to happen to the United States? That's exactly as you as anybody could predict, our economy is going to crash. Everything is going to be difficult. You think of your average car. Your average car has 30,000 components in it. A lot of those components come from China. Think of your jet, has 300,000 parts. A lot of those components come from China. So if you cut China out of the picture, yes, we have to be ready for chaos. We have to be ready for supply chains to break down completely. And during COVID, we got a small taste of what that was like. Not enough chips. We don't have cars, right? Building materials are short. Everything is short. But simply the fact is that the United States, in its kind of monopoly stage of economic development, decided that it was going to financialize everything. What I mean by that is that the US corporations decided that they were just going to ask people to give them money or demand money from people and not make anything useful. This is what we call a rentier economy. You just collect rents, right? Well, how do you collect rents? Essentially, you collect rents because you have the force to coerce other people to pay you rent, but you're still not creating anything productive. They sometimes say that GM is a finance company masquerading as a car manufacturer, right? I mean, they were making more money at one point from their loans than they were from selling cars. So there's a way in which the US has financialized its economy in incredibly non-productive ways. And therefore, it needs to have a productive substrata that's providing it everything it needs. And so if it decides to go to war against its productive subalterns, against its engine, right? Against, you're going to kill the goose, right? That lays the golden eggs. How is that going to work out for you? It's not. It's an act of madness. It's an act of suicide. And so that is what the ruling imperial elite have on the agenda. Why do they think this way? They don't think. They just believe. They're true believers. They believe that they are engaged in a war of good and evil. As Reinhold Niebuhr was the kind of architect of the Cold War, he said that we have to risk the end of the world in order to prevent the rise of the global South, of socialist movements. They honestly believe that. They really, when you hear them talk to themselves, they actually say these things to themselves. And that is what's so frightening, that this imperial elite is so out of touch with reality and so stuck on its ideological crusade that it would rather see the end of the world than the end of their power, because the end of their power for them is the end of their world. It's not the end of the world, but it's the end of their world as they see it. And they would rather end the world than let that happen.
So before we go off there, I have to say thank you, Kevin Baptiste 7976 for the $3 super chat. What do you say about looking back, hindsight 2020, of what you were the examples that you were given and what we see going on right now?
Well, I think the things that I said still hold. I talked about financialization, which I'm saying again here. I'm talking about really the kind of, like, it's almost like a death wish, but essentially they're saying better dead than red. Better, we would rather end the planet than see anybody else than live in a world of equals. And of course, everything I said about supply chains is true, but also more explicitly, what I didn't get into but could have earlier was rare earth elements, right? So not simply that there are hundreds of thousands of components that are manufactured in China, that are in everything that we use, but also in electronics. Everything that is electronic from the 1960s and 70s onwards involves rare earth elements. Now, rare earth elements are what allow you to transduce electrical current and turn it into something useful. The circuit itself transforms, amplifies, oscillates, gates, switches, etc., the electrical current. But ultimately, for you to have something useful from that electrical current requires a rare earth element. Your speakers have rare earth elements. And if they didn't have rare earth elements, they would be the size or the weight of bowling balls. Everything that we use, the screen that you're looking at, the phosphorescence involves rare earth elements. So rare earth elements are critical. China has a 90% monopoly on the production of rare earth elements. They are essentially what make modern society possible, to the extent that modern society involves electronics. And so if that were to be shut down in case of war, we would see, massive disruptions and transformations in the standard of living. We would be living, like the Amish, but, even before then. So I think we have to understand that, as I said, we really are, the world is conjoined and connected. We cannot wage war against each other. Certainly, you do not want to go to war against your key supplier, your key supply chain provider. If you do, you're essentially engaging in a death wish. But, as I said, what is going through the mind of the ruling imperial elite? Why don't they see this? I think there's some real blind spots there. And that blindness is the blindness of power and privilege. Those who are powerful and privileged think that they don't need to see reality, that they can impose their will on it.
Thank you again, my friend, for joining me on this edition of the Red Pill Diary. As always, you hit it out of the park. I really appreciate it. I'll send you the video. And be blessed and safe also.
You too. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure with you. Everybody, listen, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe or think about subscribing. They continue to pigeonhole me, and they take me out of the algorithm. They take my subscribers. They take my view counts. And we know that they're artificially suppressing this, but you continue to see that I bring on some of the best people that are out there. I have the top notch, and I think KJ is one of, and I've told him this behind closed doors, I think he's one of the best out there, period. So please subscribe and like, share. Feel free to share the video. And I want to say this as I always say before I go out. Do right by others, not because there's some material gain or because there's some accolades to be had. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember that God Almighty is watching you. And as my late, great, and beautiful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low at the actions of man. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that the divine supreme being has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. We're out of here. Deuces. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a